We can start. Welcome again, everybody. We are very happy to welcome you all for this third session of AgriLink Final Conference. So AgriLink, for people who just come today, is a H2020 research project that focuses on the role of advisory services in supporting farmers' adoption of innovation for sustainable development. And in this specific session, we will propose discussion and showcase of different practical learnings that we experiment to co-design more holistic farm advisory services. Next slide, please. So a reminder of the aim of AgriLink. So our aim was to stimulate transition toward more sustainable agriculture by focusing on the specific role of advisory services. And we have two dimensions of our project. The first one was to better understand the role played by a wide range of advisory organizations in farmer decision-making, whether to adopt or not different type of innovation, from technological innovation up to social or organizational innovation. But we also are the part of the project where we try to enhance the contribution of advisory services to learning and innovation by testing a set of different methods to support advisors' activity. Next slide, please, Mark. So to contribute to this advancement of thinking in terms of co-design of advisory services between researcher, advisors, and farmer, we had a different activity. The first one is to rely on our empirical finding. We made many, as we presented yesterday afternoon, we did a lot of interview with farmers and suppliers of advisory services that show a lack or a need to increase the uptake of more holistic or integrated advice. And as we see the importance of this gap, we tested different methods to try to help advisors to design such method. And we did it in two principal settings. The first one is living labs. So we organized 6 living labs in AgriLink where all researchers and advisors work jointly with other actors to try to develop new and improved support service for innovation. And we did it also in the integration of our results and setting of workshop for socio-technical transition scenario, which were backcasting exercise where we try to derive options about how to produce more integrated advice with and for advisors and farmers. So the goal of today's session is to showcase some of the methods that we use both in the living lab and in the scenario and for integrating our results, and to share learning with you and open a discussion based also on your experience. So now I will give the floor to Herman that will introduce a bit more the logic of the session and of the different workshops that we will propose. So I wish you a nice and rich discussion today.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Pierre. I'm Herman Schoorlemmer from the Netherlands. I introduce you the program of this morning. And today in the session, we present and discuss a number of practical learnings of AgriLink, and they're all related to the development of advisory services. In the first session, this is about farmers' advisory needs, and Ellen Bulten and Marta Mrnuštík will share results of 33 case studies in AgriLink in 13 countries, and we will see that these needs depend on the type of innovation. Then we have 2 sessions, number 2 and number 3. They are focused or directly related to the 6 living labs that we had in AgriLink. And they are focused on the development of new innovation services. In the first one, let's say session number 2, then Kevin Collins and Jorieke Potters will present the results of the evaluation of the 6 living labs. And in fact, the question is, are these living labs effective? Are they efficient? And what are conditions for successful living labs? And so they will shine some light on this point. Then we have a break of 10 minutes, so for a coffee or whatever. And after the break, we come back with session 3. And in that session, Andy Lane of the Open University will present our online course on living labs. And let's say this course is based on all kinds of key concepts and experiences in our project. It's a free online course of 10 hours, but Andy will manage it to give the first impression in 20 minutes to you. Then session number 4, this is about peer-to-peer mentoring. In AgriLink, we used a lot of co-innovation methods and models. So we had collective sessions with all facilitators and monitors of the 6 living labs. So we came together, and all these facilitators and monitors, they had their own specific, let's say, problems or challenges in their living labs. And we found a nice way to help each other in deepening the problem and come up with solutions. And in fact, that's what we call peer-to-peer mentoring. So we were thinking about how to explain this exercise, but we thought, okay, just let's do it. We do this exercise together with you, and Melanie van Raaij and Egil Stræte prepared the session, and they found Astrid Jacobsen of the Norwegian Agricultural Advisory Service. They found her as a volunteer to share her advisory problem, and it's about climate change. And I hope at the end of the session that Astrid has received a lot of good ideas from the panel and from you. Then number 5, that's a session prepared by Jaroslav, Pražan, Jorieke and Boelie Elzen. And this is a session about integrated advice. And so we have seen in our project that advice to farmers, let's say, is often given on single topics, single issues like a pest or a problem or whatever, but it's not dealing with the whole farming system. But we know that this integrated advice is very important to make steps in sustainability. So in the session, we will discuss with you how to stimulate this profession of integrated advice. So after this morning, you know more about farmers' needs. You know when and how living labs are useful. You know about the free online course. You have joined the peer-to-peer session, and you have discussed about integrated advice. So I think it's a very nice program. If you have questions or suggestions, put them in the chat. And now I would like to give the word to Marta and Ellen for the session about farmer advisory needs. Okay,
perfect. Yeah, thank you, Herman, for the introduction and for the nice overview. So in the next 25 minutes or so, Marta and I will present findings that are related to farmers' advisory needs. So if we can go to the next slide, please. There you see that farmers in AgriLink, we approach the advisory system by starting from the farmers' needs. So what we have done so far is asking what are farmers' advisory needs across different innovation areas, and how are their needs met, or how are they not met, of course. And we have identified advice needs in 70 narratives. So those were qualitative data across 33 case studies in 13 AgriLink partnering countries. And based on these narratives and in those case studies, Marta and I will present findings related to farmers' advisory needs. So on the next slide, we have an overview of the 4 innovation areas that we used within AgriLink. And for some, this may be a bit of repetition, but just a short recap of the structure that we used in AgriLink. So we clustered AgriLink case studies in 4 innovation areas: the technological innovation area, the process innovation area, the marketing and financing innovation area, and a social and organizational area. So Marta and I, what we will do is we will present farmers' needs that are specific to each of these innovation areas. So each innovation area is clustered again in more specific innovation clusters, which I will not explain completely now, because we will also give you examples for each innovation area. So we will get to know the innovation areas and the innovation clusters throughout the presentation as well. So on the next slide, we have first a question to you, actually. So during this first session on farmers' needs, we would like to ask you to reflect on how you think that policy can better support farmers' advice needs. Right, so like I said in the beginning, in AgriLink, we started reasoning from the farmers' advice needs, and reasoning from those needs, how can advice best support the farmer. So the question is, which approach should or can agricultural policy prioritize to support advisors to better meet farmers' advice needs? Now, that's a very broad question, of course, but we are curious what kind of discussions you can have in the chat during our presentation. And then at the end of this session on farmers' need, we will come back to this question and then present some of our ideas, of course, as well. But then we are also curious to see what people have come up with in the chat. So please feel free to use the chat and to discuss anything related to how policy can support advisors to meet farmers' needs. So this is the question that we basically give you to think about and to discuss in the chat. And then we go on presenting those the needs for each of the innovation areas. So next slide, please, Mark. So I said before that we present the needs specific to each innovation area, but firstly I want to present this slide where we found that some advisory needs are shared by farmers across all 4 of the innovation areas. So regardless of the type of innovations, these are needs that were shared by farmers across all of the innovations that we studied in AgriLink. So those shared needs are firstly a need for advice on agronomical or technical skills. So for example, on how do I cultivate this new crop, right? So this is, I think, what a lot of people think about first when you think about farm advice, is this skills need. And then a second need that was shared across all innovation areas was needs for assessments. So for example, cost-benefit assessments of an innovation, or financial assessments, where farmers have the need to see, is this an innovation that will make me money, basically, or will I lose money if I implement this innovation, and how much do I need to invest, for example. And then a second need that was shared across all innovations was the need for advice on how to tailor an innovation to the specific farm condition. So in essence, this is the question that a farmer has: does this innovation work for me? And does this innovation work on my specific farm, in my context, and in my circumstances? So these are needs that are found regardless of the type of innovation. And then, of course, the conclusion from this is that these are useful things to include for advice providers. So always include services that cater to those needs, because most farmers will have those needs when implementing a new innovation. So then specifically on the technological innovation area, and just a small reminder to please turn off your microphone if you are not speaking. Can you go to the next slide, Mark? Thank you. So the technological innovation area is about ICT technologies, for example, the using of drones or sensing technology. And in this innovation area, what we found is that individual farmers across cases and across countries share a very similar need for advice. So you could say that farmers' needs are, well, they are rather homogeneous regardless of the specific innovation that they implemented, and also regardless of context. So typical for this innovation area is that there is a constantly increasing need for skills to keep up with developing technology. So here we also saw some tension because it is difficult for both the farmer, but also for the advisor to keep up with rapidly developing technologies and also changes in those technologies. So technology suppliers play a very important role in this innovation cluster since they simply have the best and the most up-to-date knowledge regarding the innovation. But even then, for suppliers, there's also a lot of learning that goes on as they go along with the farmer. So this is really specific for this innovation area, that there's just this basically always learning and increasing skills, even after implementing an innovation on the farm. So crucial for this innovation area is also the assessment stage. So you can imagine that, for example, if you would implement sensing technology or the use of drones on a farm, that requires large investments. And large investments often mean large risks. So farmers really have the need for things like cost-benefit analysis to see if this innovation area is a good fit, or if this specific innovation is a good fit on their farm. And we also see that droppers, so farmers who initially implemented the innovation but then stopped using the innovation again, that those farmers often lack the support in assessing and implementing the innovation. So because of this lack of support, the innovation doesn't work on their farm and they drop the innovation again. So this is an overview of what we learned from all of the cases and narratives in this technological innovation area. And now I will give the floor to Marta, and Marta will present an example from practice from this technological innovation area. Yes, thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Ellen. As an example for this innovation area, we choose Czech farmers who seek technological innovation in the variable rate precision farming and control traffic farming to fulfill new state restrictions on his erosion risk fields. Because he missed the support from the independent advisors with update information, and he also didn't trust to black box solution from the technology suppliers. So he initiated the network of farmers, attracted researchers, and started field trials, tested different technology on this farm, share knowledge between the farmers, and disseminated their experience to the wider interested farming community. So the result was that the network attracted new farmers and support the adoption of the technology innovation in the region, mainly thanks to the support of this innovative farmer. So the lesson from this example is, as already Ellen also mentioned, that if there is not enough reliable information and experience, the farmers could initiate the networks as adaptive strategy. So that's for the technology innovation. Next slide, please, Mark.
Thank you, Marta. So we've seen some examples now from the technological innovation area. Now we move on to the process innovation area. And this innovation area is about pest control and soil improvement techniques. So specific for this innovation area are farmers' needs that are related to support for changing practices, right? So farmers don't implement a specific technology that adds on to what they were already doing, but they change practices. For example, they stop plowing, or they change the way they plow. And then also about learning about the complexity and implementation of innovation. So what we see in this innovation area is that the example of plowing, that makes the whole farming practice more complex, and you need to think about how do I implement this innovation so that it works for the rest of my farm management as well. And then there's a need for knowledge that farmers have about soil and farm practices, specifically related to soil management. So here, there's really a need to know how does this work and how can I implement this innovation on my farm. So in this innovation area, there were a few main reasons why the innovation failed or why farmers had difficulties implementing the innovation. So a first reason was that there was unexpected or overlooked negative side effects or complexity of the innovation. So this was overlooked by either the advisor and the farmer, or by the advisor or by the farmer himself. So for example, this overlooked complexity can be that there's a need for additional technological change, right? For that the farmer didn't think about beforehand, and that makes the implementation of the innovation more complex than initially thought. And then related to that is the lack of sufficient knowledge about implementation. So the farmer implements the innovation, and then there's insufficient knowledge available about how to actually do that. So the farmer is convinced that this is a good fit, but then when actually implementing an innovation, he or she doesn't receive sufficient information about how to actually do that. And then this is something that we mentioned in the beginning, that there's this need to tailor practices to needs. This was a very specific for this innovation area, where a reason why the innovation failed or implementation failed, because there was a lack of tailoring of the practice to local needs. So here you can imagine that if a farmer says, I want to implement this innovation on pest control, but then there's no tailoring to the specific plots that the farmer is on, the specific soil that the farmer is on, etc. Then that is a reason why the farmer says it doesn't work for me, because of this lack of tailoring to his or her specific local needs. And now again, I give the floor to Marta to present again an example from practice from this process innovation area. Oh, you're on mute, Marta. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, thank you. So for this innovation area, we choose the Dutch family farm, farmer who is growing strawberries faced crop damage caused by nematodes, and at the same time experience growing pressure from the society regarding the use of chemicals. In this case, the consulted experts have seen the increasing interest of the farmers in target cultivation through the research and adoption. And the main reason why the farmers need to cultivate targets was that the alternative chemical way become increasingly difficult due to stricter rules and regulations. The research in this case was mainly executed on experimental farms in the focus area, and can be seen as a hotspot for the innovation, as a demonstration for the others. So the advisors use these collected data for the research and to make farmers aware and to assist them with the implementation of targets. So in this case, we could see the quite successful implementation in the point of view of effectiveness, wide adaptive, and also the beneficial on the other aspects like the soil quality. So it's another good and successful example. So the word is back to Ellen.
Okay, Ellen,
yes.
you have 2-3 minutes to finalize your story.
Yeah, well,
yeah?
we will be a bit difficult, but we will go a bit quicker. Thank you. So the marketing and financing innovation area is next, and this innovation area includes innovation about retro innovation, so that's reintroducing certain technology or practices. It's about introducing new crops, about direct marketing of products, and developing new activities. So farmers' needs in this innovation area are very specific. So they are specifically about, of course, the marketing aspect, which is very different from changing practices when growing crops, for example. So farmers' needs here are related to things like how to create added value with the products that you produce, but also how to find customers and how to increase your marketing skills. So those are very specific needs that are obviously related to this marketing aspect of the innovation area. And then also a need related to the coordination and facilitation of collective activities. So this specificity also means that there is a need for very specific, that the needs are very specific, but also that traditional agricultural advisors cannot always cater to those needs, right? Because traditional agricultural advisors will often be more focused on agronomical or technical skills, and they simply don't have the knowledge on how to create added value, for example. So in this innovation area, this was a bit of a struggle where to find advice on the needs that farmers have. So Marta, you go ahead. So I keep it a bit shorter.
Okay. So in this case, we choose the farmer who needs support to get access to the market, what we've seen in more countries. In this particular case, the NGO established the system for collecting direct marketing of local organic products to help farms build a solid customer base and at the same time create a community where actors are co-responsible for the sustainability of the local food system. So the system, which involves 45 farmers, rely on online platform for gathering orders and on 4 locations for product distribution. The system aims to facilitate farmers' access to markets, but it also has a strong positive side effect to contribute to strengthening the network of farmers and consequently to amplify the effect of the peer-to-peer support system. So back to Ellen.
Yeah, so we arrive at the final innovation area that's about social and organizational innovation. And that includes innovations about either natural resource common management or the innovation around labor arrangements. So farmers' needs in this innovation area are mostly about how to coordinate and how to organize themselves. So how to work in a new setting where you work, for example, in a cooperative or in a group, and also exploring what is the advantage or the disadvantage of implementing this innovation. And here we see that needs are often not met. So the farmers have needs about collective coordination, about exploring disadvantages, but there is a lack of know-how. So farmers themselves are exploring how do we do this, and advisors simply don't have the knowledge because they don't have the experience or because it's also new to them. And again, it's not related strictly to agricultural or agronomic practices. So there's a clear knowledge gap and a lack of know-how on how to implement these innovations. So a final example from Marta.
Yeah, so final example will be from Norway, where the sheep farmers experience big losses because of the predators, and they need to trace sheep during the pasture season. the country administration started the project to offer sheep farmers electronic wells as at the subsidized price. But the condition was to establish the formalized pasture group beyond the previous habitual cooperation among the sheep farmers in the region who were use large outfield pasture which they own or have the right to use together with the farmers. So in this case, the county support to establish better cooperation and organize these social innovation. So it's all from me. Back to Ellen.
Yeah, thank you, Marta. I think it's nice that you that we have these more practical examples. So Herman, I know that we are a bit behind on time. I have this one slide where I want to raise the point when advice needs are not met, right? So of course, farmers' advice needs are not always met. So what do farmers do when this happens? And we found two important strategies that farmers rely on. And the first one is simply their own skills, because farmers, of course, have a lot of knowledge themselves. And they also organize themselves, for example, by creating networks or platforms where they share skills and experiences and fix this need for knowledge that way. And then a second important strategy is relying on informal networks. So we saw a lot of farmers who rely on peers, family, neighbors. So those are all people with long-lasting, trustful relationship to the farmers, who are then able to support the farmer when his or her needs are not met. So of course there's more strategies, but these are two very important ones. So finally, I want to go back to this discussion, Herman. We also started a bit later, so maybe we can have a little bit. So in the beginning, I asked this question about what should policy prioritize to better support farmers' advice needs, and I'm just curious, Pierre or Louise, what the discussion in the chat was.
Yeah, maybe Mark could show the next slide.
Yeah, thank you. So we have included some suggestions, but
yeah, sorry, Ellen, but we are running out of time. So I suggest we have one or two suggestions, and Pierre has taken a look at the chat. So Pierre, could you?
Yes, well,
yeah,
sure. Yes, thanks. I think it was a good start to insight and findings of a project to launch this global discussion. There were two types of comments. One of them, and I will give the floor to Sylvain Sturel about the assessment stage, because you highlighted in your results specific gaps at this stage. And so I'll give the floor to Sylvain, who raised the point about ex-ante assessment of innovation and its difficulties. So I think it was an important point. So Sylvain, if you could elaborate a bit, please.
Yes, so thank you very much, Pierre. Yes, it was a comment I was reflecting from the point of view of an advisor in this case. If an advisor goes on a farm and has to support a farmer to make changes, for example, while to provide strategic advice about business orientations of the farm, to make a business plan, you need to rely on data, because you need to make simulations, and I thought it was maybe useful to highlight the importance of having a good local data to make simulations and to try to quantify different scenarios for changes on a farm. So my point was that a network of reference farms is very useful for advisory services. So it's it relates to the organization of advisory services, actually, this comment. And the second comment was more about very complex changes when you change the whole production system on a farm. At the moment, I am participating in a project about diversification of cropping systems. And you really can only assess the effect of a change in a cropping system after several years. So it's very complex to make to provide advice to a farmer who is aiming to change his whole cropping system, for example, by diversifying his crops and yes, reducing inputs of chemicals. So yes, but again, it is useful to have good references to try to make simulations.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you, Sylvain, for bringing that up. And I think you also already touched upon some of the ways on how we can fix those issues, right? That we will also talk about a bit later on this session, for example, on more integrated advice where you look at the whole farm system instead of at one practice. That also has consequences for the rest of the farm system. Yeah. So thank you for adding your thoughts.
Herman, do we have time to take a second comment and then go to?
Okay, just one comment, but let's say I think we need some extra time after 12:30. So if people are agreed that we steal 10 minutes extra, then we have the next could have the next question.
Okay, so let's take only one question. I invite you to read the chat as well. There's some good examples, including from our colleague in Australia and discussion. Just maybe, Suzanne, if you could raise your point, because it would also be a teaser for the discussion at the end of the meeting. You raise a point on how to provide integrative advice. And I think if you could just raise your question, maybe we won't answer it fully now, but it will be also an incentive for next step in our meeting. So Suzanne from the
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Pierre. I think it's really a complex question, and I've thought about it yesterday evening for a longer time after your initial session also of the conference. So that really triggered my thoughts. And I was wondering if you have reflected already of what the final point, where do we want to get with this advice on integrative result, get somewhere, if that is really feasible. Because if you want to provide the integrated advice, who then would do that? So who are the people who have the competences to do that? And if we had these people, who will pay for them? So is it the farmer themselves, or is it the taxpayer who pays for it? How many of these people would we need? Is it one advisor for 20 farmers so that he really knows well the systems, the individuals, the situation, to really think within the frame of the individual farm? Or is it 100 farms per advisor, which is already difficult, probably, I have no idea, to address the holistic reflection on the very individual situation? And if we have this ratio and pay it publicly, then who would be the organization that holds this large number of people? And if that is a public authority, then we risk again to establish huge public authorities that become a beast in itself, because they need administration, bureaucracy, hierarchies, management, internal training, control, and so on. So we will have a large overhead that we need to feed with this support. And I'm just wondering, if we think the concept of integrated and holistic advice up to the end, what actually kind of system will that be? And I think the taxpayer can't afford to do that. And I would really like to see what AgriLink has reflected about it, and what others think about it. I have no answer to it.
Oh, you are muted. Yeah,
it's an important question. I propose that we don't answer now and keep that in mind. And it's also related to multi-actor settings. So the answer may not be in finding only one type of advisor that will fit all these competencies, but also how to bring advisors with different competencies together. And I think it fits nicely with the type of multi-actor design that we tested in our project. That would be a good transition for the next presentation. But we'll come back to your question at the end with Boelie and Jaroslav session. So thank you, Suzanne. That's a very complex issue indeed. Yeah. So maybe Herman, I'll let you the floor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, and thank you very much for all the exchange in the chat.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Ellen and Marta. And then I would like to give the word now to Jorieke Potters and Kevin Collins. I guess that Kevin will start, and it's about the living labs, evaluation and conditions.
Okay,
yeah.
Thank you, Herman. So this presentation is about living labs, the evaluation of conditions, and it's given by myself and Jorieke. The briefest, next slide, please. The living labs has taken place. The work of living labs and AgriLink has taken place in the context of changing agricultural futures, as Marta and Ellen have just been outlining. The nature of agriculture is changing because of societal expectations, ecological challenges, climate changes, the realities of decision-making on farms dealing with complex economic decision-making, new markets, and so on. So the farmers are having to deal with increased complexity, and as a result, the farming advisory landscape is also changing. Advisors are also taking on new roles as partners. They are having to inspire new perspectives, perhaps amongst farmers who are reluctant to change their practices. They, as just mentioned, advisors are having to make sense of complexity, dealing with a whole range of new issues that are on the farm. And the farming landscape, the advisors who are providing this information has also expanded. Farmers are having to deal with more and more advisors offering their information, and that increases the demands upon farmers themselves to make decisions. As a result of the widening of agricultural agendas, then of course more stakeholders are included and their voices are being heard about what agriculture should look like in the future. And so the multiplicity of views and the complexity of ideas is increasing. And all of this places new demands upon farmers and their needs for decision making. So in AgriLink, we've been using living labs as a way of co-creating the innovation support services in order to provide support services which are more based in context and hopefully meet farmers' needs better than existing provision of services. So next slide, please, Mark. What is a living lab? If you're familiar with living labs, then this will be graphic, won't be new to you. This comes from the European Network of Living Labs, and it shows that each living lab has 5 key characteristics. They're defined by active user involvement. They take place in a real life setting, and so the idea of a lab in a scientific sense is perhaps incorrect. They are defined by multiple stakeholders participating, diversity of views, diversity of opinions, and the methods that are used in a living lab can be very varied because, of course, the living lab will be specific to a particular context, particular needs, and a particular set of skills and capacities. But all the living labs are defined by co-creation, the idea in which the people in the living lab are engaging with each other to identify their particular needs and identify ways and strategies that they wish to take forward. So just move on, just a click, Mark, just something should appear on the right now. Thank you. So within AgriLink, we've been seeing living labs very much as user-centered, iterative, open innovation spaces. And we've been drawing upon design thinking and system thinking to help design the living labs. We've established peer-to-peer monitoring and mentoring. We've developed tools sort of in a co-creative way. And we've also developed a training module, which my colleague Andy Lane will be talking about in a later session. So the key question for AgriLink is when and how are living labs appropriate for innovation support services for more sustainable agriculture? And I've put these, or we've put these pictures up deliberately to show that that labs are not sort of technical spaces, they are very much in real life settings. And secondly, to show that they're about people, and they are very diverse contexts in which these people are operating. And so these are just some snapshots from the various living labs we've had. So some of them have been exploring in-field demonstrations. Some of them have been engaging with experts to gain more information so they can act in a more sustainable way. And other times, the living labs have been very informal discussions about establishing the nature of living lab and some of its priorities. In AgriLink, we've used 6 living labs, and I don't have time to talk about them all here today. There's a lot more information on our website, but very briefly, the 6 countries what we've been using: the Netherlands and Belgium, we've been looking at sustainable maize cultivation. In Italy, about local food networks. Norway, about crop rotation between farms. In Latvia, helping farmers find information to advice. And in Spain, it's bringing farmers closer to the innovation itself and engaging with them on that development. And in Romania, looking at how to improve access to fiscal information in order to be able to expand into new markets. Now, we've been able to take all of that experience, that learning from the living labs, because we've established from the outset a very strong monitoring and evaluation process, which is a unique feature perhaps of AgriLink and perhaps of many living labs in any context. And we've done that through drawing on design thinking and systems thinking. And very importantly, we've had a dedicated monitor and facilitator in each living lab. And those monitors have had to engage with the wider team, developing reflection memos. So that's a sort of an account of what's happening in their living lab from the very beginning, and it's a reflexive process over time. So in developing their accounts, they're able to reflect upon them and change or intervene or help the living lab develop over time. And that is also, those reflective processes, learning processes have also taken place across the living labs in the AgriLink consortium meetings, where we've brought together all of the monitors and facilitators to try and distill some learning from across living labs. And we've used, drawing on systems thinking, we've used 3 key criteria in order to help us make sense of what's the living labs have been doing and their effectiveness. So these 3 criteria are efficacy, efficiency, and effectiveness. And I'll talk about those now. So don't be put off by this slide. The 3 criteria appear in the middle. So efficacy, did the living lab achieve its purpose? Efficiency, did it use resources well? That's people, time, enthusiasm, money. Was it effective? Did the living lab contribute to the wider AgriLink aims of more sustainable forms of agriculture? So I'll just go through each of those in turn, just to give you a feeling for that. Above the criteria, those are instances where the living labs were more efficient or more effective. And below the criteria, this is when they were less efficient, less effective. So with the efficacy, did it achieve its purpose? Our findings suggest that where the issues are quite small scale, where there's quite a defined initiative, where the issues are broadly uncontroversial, then living labs are less efficacious, and they are less able to achieve their purpose. Where there's greater complexity of the situation, more stakeholder interest, or willingness to learn, then living labs are more able to achieve a set purpose. In terms of resources efficiency, when living labs are focusing on technical discussions, there's limited time, stakeholders aren't so involved or don't have the capacity to engage, then they are less efficient. But they are more efficient where there is upfront investment which is needed to build trust and learning. There is a bit of a tension here because, of course, if you develop a living lab, then that creates a delay, and because you're trying to engage with people, trying to develop trust, and a lot of people see that as a delay, but actually it's a very important upfront investment in order to progress later on in time as the living lab develops. Are they effective? This is more difficult because, of course, the living labs in AgriLink are only for 2 to 3 years, but we do see them as quite really important for helping us understanding of their role in agricultural knowledge information systems. Their level of learning can vary within a living lab and between living labs. That's very evident. But what we are seeing is that there is a new role developing for advisors in these complex situations that farmers are facing. And we can then think about the advisory role becoming one of providing spaces for learning as much as providing information. There is an inherent tension, though, with living labs in relation to existing policy or project goals. Living labs are open innovation spaces where projects have predetermined outcomes but are using living labs to help develop those outcomes. Then that guarantee cannot be given that the living labs will produce certain things. So just using them as policy devices to implement some predetermined outcome, they will not be working. They are less effective in that process. So all of this gives rise to some learning about some conditions for living lab, which my colleague Jorieke is going to talk about now. You're muted, Jorieke.
That's cool. That's one of the conditions, is to unmute yourself. On the basis of the rich learning in the 6 AgriLink living labs, we've tried to digest them a bit and translate them into conditions for living labs, which gives some indication of how difficult or easy it will be to develop a living lab and how to do it in certain conditions. So the first condition it's advisable to look at is the complexity of the challenge. So there's a bit of finding a balance between the challenge needs to be complex enough to justify a living lab, but also some harmony is needed in order to really collaborate and co-create. So for this complexity of challenge, it's important to look at whether the different stakeholders more or less agree on the direction of the change. And whether they agree on the type of solutions. Of course, it's not needed that they all is set beforehand, but if they really are diverse in their direction or the type of solutions they want to think of, co-creation becomes really difficult, and maybe it's better to opt then for a more multi-stakeholder dialogue type of approach. Also the alignment between, I'm sorry, this is still on the complexity of the challenge, also the alignment between the interest of the end user and the sustainability challenge is really important. So if you use a living lab for the sake of awareness raising of farmers needing to do something, then a living lab is not really the appropriate tool. Then again, a multi-actor dialogue or awareness raising activities are more, or you can of course include them in a lab, but it's not strictly co-creation then. In the second condition, the enabling setting, Kevin explained already a bit. You need to the setting needs to allow for interaction and for experimentation. It's important that failure is also acceptable. That you have to be able to really go on a journey with your stakeholders. So if you want a fixed outcome, then please don't start a living lab, but opt for a more strict way of achieving or a different topic. If we go to the third one, which is the energy to move. So a living lab really requires stakeholders to engage, and so they need to feel a sense of urgency to work on the topic of the living lab. And also a level of trust is important. Yeah, and another important thing is that they need to understand their interdependence, because co-creation really involves active engagement. So yeah, it's really working together. And the last one is about the methodological preparation. So you need a facilitator with a mandate with the stakeholders in order to guide the process. monitoring and evaluation in place is really useful to be able to adapt to circumstances and how the process evolves. Yeah. If we go to the next one, the next slide. These conditions, in order to be able to allow them in other situations and for other projects and people are thinking about starting a living lab, we are developing a really practical assessment tool, developing with practical questions, which yes, no answers, which gives an indication, if you answer them all, about whether in this situation it is a good idea to start a living lab or better to opt for other multi-actor or even more straightforward approaches. But it also gives indication of where the bottlenecks are, where the challenges, where to expect challenges, and on the basis of the AgriLink experiences, some tips and suggestions, do's and don'ts, how to deal with the situation. This one will be, the assessment tool will be available on the AgriLink legacy website. Yeah, the one last slide about the scaling of living labs, because having heard this story, scaling a living lab is not just about replication of what we've been doing in one situation to the other, nor the knowledge that's been developed in one lab is also not straightforwardly transferable, because it really depends on the basis of experiences, and hopefully the assessment tool and the conditions and all the experiences we share with AgriLink can help to define in each situation, like what is the boundary of the topic, who to involve, what the number of participants you want to involve, where you are really locating the living lab, and what is the culture, the practice and identities of the people involved. And what skills and capacities do you have and can be developed together. So by considering these different aspects, you can really design your lab to suit the situation.
So it doesn't matter how they get there, as if they want to try.
We have, okay, thank you. Okay, so these are the lessons that we wanted to present on the basis of the AgriLink experiences. I'm open to, I heard already some noise, but questions on or suggestions or other experiences. Herman, I don't know how much time we have, but
I think we can take 5 minutes to have some discussion. I think I will give the floor to Karin Ellerman. There was a bit of discussion on the chat about this new role of facilitator and who should play this role and how to train facilitators. So maybe Karin, you want to you could give us some illustration or insight on this point.
Yes, thank you. So I think the role of facilitators is important to bring together the right people, especially for peer-to-peer learning and other issues. And to create a whole system, my experience is also that a back office is very important to ensure impartial advice, to bring also teams of advisors together. Creating a structure according to the agriculture structure in a region or in a member state, because we heard some specific advisory tasks for diversification issues, for example, and then you would need really teamwork. Maybe the farmer asks the regular advisor, but he is not the specialist, so then you need a structure which can address also the other issues, and you have to have also links with policy. Of course, if there are new tasks or regulations coming up, you have to ensure that all the advisors going to the farm level are updated, have updated information, and also access to the current regulations. This is my background, what I meant with this comment. Thank you.
Before you answer, maybe we'll take also a Bruno Eller comment, was, I think, in a bit on the same topic. So Bruno, if you would like to develop your idea. Bruno Eller, maybe I do not pronounce well your name, I'm sorry if that's the case.
Sorry, I was not aware. I guess the comments in the chat now, they exactly respond at my understanding. There are different roles, and not every advisor, every facilitator can do this job. So you have to find people, they are trained to do, let's say, for instance, to facilitate the peer-to-peer exchange and to get into contact with different specialists. And of course, you need the experts, you need basic information, valuable, truthful information that you are up to date. But my experience was often that this role of an advisor, as a moderator, as a facilitator, to bring people together, it's a work. It's difficult to see. When it works well, then almost you don't see this work, and that's his job, to bring people together and to bring them to create trust between the actors. That was my point.
Do you want to?
Yes.
Give a first answer, and then we maybe take another question?
First, thanks for the rich ideas of how what is really needed to establish living labs, and the key role of the facilitator. I think the next session on the course that we've developed hopefully contributes to developing some of the skills and tools needed to facilitate living labs. But I fully agree that it's not for all advisors to become facilitators, and maybe sometimes even other people can step in to facilitate these kind of processes. So they do require specific skills. While listening to the comments, I'm really inspired to also, for the last session for the integrated advice, if you can have regional living labs where farmers can come with their questions for integrated advice, it could be really an interesting feature, I think. Kevin, you want to?
Yeah, I think it's important just to mention that, you know, the skill sets that the facilitators had coming into AgriLink, I think they all realized that they needed to develop their own skills for facilitation and to be thinking about living labs. None of them had run living labs before, for example. So through AgriLink, we actually ran some sort of internal training programs for the advisors, the facilitators and the monitors and that. So I think you're absolutely right. There is a skill set that does need to be developed, and there is a need for training in these particular types of innovative co-creative spaces, and not all advisors have those skills, and not all of them are going to need it, but there is a need for a certain type of facilitator to do that.
Thank you. I'm looking at Herman. Should we close the session? And
I think I suggest now to close the session. There are some other questions in the chat now, so maybe Jorieke and Kevin could have a look at it. Yeah, okay. One moment, Jorieke. Yeah.
Briefly, just for the sunshine, I like the expression of Michael, who says it's the sunshine sailing method, the living lab. It may sound a bit like that. It's definitely not. We have encountered many different problems, and I think these facilitation skills are needed in order not for sailing, but for also to deal with building trust and also conflicting situations where interests of advisors seem harmonious at first, but when coming closer in developing, difficulties are encountered. So I think that it really can be a rough sea to sail.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think where there is mistrust and lots of difficulty, it is going to be really hard to start a living lab. But the process of discussing the possibility of developing a living lab might actually start to build some trust. So there does need to be very skilled and very careful facilitation and understanding of the situation in order to engage with those stormy situations. But there is a possibility of something sunnier coming out of that if you do engage with it in an open, co-creative way.
Okay, thank you, Jorieke and Kevin. Then I would like to have a break now. So